Welcome to the Happy Mama Movement podcast. I'm Amy Taylor-Kabbaz, mama, journalist, coach, and founder of Mama Rising. This podcast is a space of community and collaboration. We gather stories of matrescence, motherhood, womanhood, and change told by our Mama Rising coaches and mothers around the globe, in the knowing that through our stories, we can begin to heal and change the way the world sees, values, and supports mothers everywhere. So, welcome to the Happy Mama Movement. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. So many times people ask me whether matrescence ever ends and whether we re-enter matrescence or start it over again with each pregnancy and birth. And my answer is always, first of all, no, it never ends. And second, yes, of course, it's a completely different experience to re-enter motherhood, to re-enter pregnancy or fertility journeys. And each time we re-enter it, we have yet another identity shift. So on the podcast today, I've invited my beautiful friend, Sophia Pallas, who over the last few years has been an absolute anchor in my life. We have known each other for a number of years, and as you will hear, have first met through business, then shared marriage breakdowns and divorce, motherhood, singlehood, dating, and now Sophia's remarried and has re-entered motherhood for a third time with a different partner and has re-entered it with such different insights of herself and a real different understanding of what's about to come. I think it's really important on this podcast to show the different variations of this experience and what we learn through each and every one of them. None of them are right or wrong. It's just a reflection on how much we understand about ourselves and our experiences. And as Soph explained, also the season that we're in our own lives, or as she says, or in our charts, and what that means for us right now. Enjoy this conversation and please let Soph and I know what you took out of it the most. Enjoy. Sophia, welcome, my beautiful friend, to the podcast. Thank you so much for doing this with me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
You and I have had so many different incarnations of our friendship and our connection through building businesses together, through marriage and then divorce and then single and then dating and then for you meeting the love of your life and getting married again, which I was honored to be at that amazing wedding. And now you have re-entered motherhood, matrescence, for a second or third time, but a very different experience from becoming a mother with your first husband and much younger. And what I have seen since I've known you is this exploration of who you really are. And going into motherhood again now, I really wanted to get you on the podcast to hear how different it is to become a mother to a different partner. And also draw on your amazing insights into astrology to help us all understand these different times and seasons of our life. So let's begin with your first experience of becoming a mother. Tell us how that unfolded, where you were in your life, and as you will, where you were in your chart and in your life growth.
Yes. Okay. Well, when I had my first son, I feel like I was very young. I was still in my 20s. I was 29. So I was going through what's called the Saturn return, which is where the planet Saturn, our planet of structure and boundaries, responsibility, maturity, comes back to the place that it was in when we were born. So it's quite a pivotal moment astrologically, and it represents a major life change, whether that be, motherhood, getting married, moving continents, setting up a business, could be anything like that, but it's a major kind of turning point. And for me, that was absolutely, yeah.
I got engaged at 29.
There you go. So yeah, it's a major turning point, and that was definitely my experience with the birth of my first son. He was, it was a traumatic birth, but it was just this whole new world. And as I've said to you, like, I had no experience with babies. I had no friends with babies. I had not been around babies. I'm an only child. Didn't grow up with, a big extended family of children around me or anything like that. So I kind of had no idea what I was doing and no idea what to expect, and didn't have a support network to kind of call on to see what was normal or what wasn't normal. And, I did end up having one friend who had a baby right around the same time. So we were kind of navigating it together, which was great. And I did join a mother's group and I did all the things that you do, but I felt so, so lost. I remember that, sense of this complete, like, where have I gone? Like, I don't know what to do. I lost all my confidence. He's a beautiful boy, beautiful child, but I didn't know what I was doing. So I really struggled to get him to sleep. I struggled feeding. Oh my God. It was just like any sense of control that I had was taken in that time. And that's a really hard thing. Mm-hmm. That was a really hard thing for me to deal with as someone who loves to be in control. It was like, you no longer have control, but you have all the responsibility.
That's so true.
Yeah, it was like this huge sledgehammer hit me, and I didn't know what to do. And I ended up coming across your work a few years later, and I remember thinking, oh my God, yes, this is it. This is what I was feeling, this complete change of identity. But at the time, I didn't know what was happening, and I went through a period of postpartum depression and all of that kind of stuff. And I have to say, like, this third time, like, I had my daughter 3 years after that, but it took me a long time to want to go back again because I felt so traumatized from the first experience. But I had my daughter and then later divorced, and then went back a third time now, 10 years later, 10 years after my first son was born, I had my second son. And yeah, that has been a completely different experience, a 180 in all the ways, I think, of the process from pregnancy to birth to afterwards has been a completely different experience.
When you reflect on that, there's so many layers to it, right? Obviously, you're with a different partner, and obviously also you've gone into it with your eyes wide open. Yes. It's not this unknown that you're stepping into this time. Mm-hmm. But I want to, and we'll get to all of that. But first I want to reflect with you what you see in yourself about the difference between how much you know yourself between that first time round and this, because I've had the privilege, and I really mean this, I've had the privilege to witness you go through such a profound exploration of who you really are since your divorce, and the courage you've shown to really claim these parts of yourself. We would call them the woo-woo parts of yourself. You've changed your business, you've changed your life. Makes it sound easy. It's not at all, but you've really gone through this process of deep exploration and acceptance of who you really are. And I think that must be such a different grounding to go into motherhood with. I'd love to hear what you think about that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I remember thinking at the time when I was in the mothers group when my first son, just after he was born, thinking, I wish I had waited till be older and know who I was before I
Wow.
entered this experience. And that was partly because most of the women in my mother's group were at least 5 years older than me. So they were at least in their mid-30s. And I remember thinking, God, this to myself, thinking, oh, this would be so much easier if I were older. And I'm not sure that's entirely true. But I think what I was subconsciously picking up on was that, yes, I didn't know who I was or what I wanted before I went into motherhood. So it was even more disconcerting because it was like the ground was unsteady in the first place. So
Yes.
I
Wow.
didn't really have anything that I could kind of grab onto to bring me back to find myself again. And so I think it did take me all of that time, 10 years pretty much, to figure out who I was going to be.
Yeah.
And figure out how I was going to be a mum and
A wife.
A wife and an ex-wife.
Yeah.
All of those labels. So I absolutely think we're kind of thrown into this kind of washing machine of situations, but also I think of, the planets and the astrology of it all. I can reflect on that and I can be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense for me now, because I know I had to go through these certain transits, these certain challenges, I suppose, to come out the other side, because it was like I needed to learn these lessons. I needed to learn these lessons so that I could have the life that I have now and I could be set up for the next chapter of my life. And that's how I like to see astrology, because I think it's really easy to get stuck in that, why is this happening to me kind of zone. And if we can just take a step back and go, hang on, what do I need to learn from this? What is this trying to tell me so that I can move through this with a bit more understanding, compassion for myself, compassion for the people around me, and get to the kind of person that I know that I want to be, if that makes sense.
It makes so much sense. And you've been able to provide that for me so much over the last few years through understanding my chart and reading my chart for me. What I have learnt from being in your world, and I know that this has been the case for you as well, is that so often when big things happen, whether it's for the positive, new baby, new marriage, new career, new opportunities, or for what feels like the worst, breakdowns, endings, all of those things, it's so hard in those moments to put it into a bigger perspective of where this fits in your life, what this is here for, why it's happening now, without being so personally responsible for it. We kind of get very micro with it, don't we? What I've learned with you, and gosh, how many times have you been able to do this for me, is that reflect back. But Amy, when you look at your overall life cycle, if you look where you are at the moment in your chart and in your life, this makes sense. And the breath that brings me, the nervous system exhale, that, you mean that there's something else at play here other than me just stuffing this up? Or it's been such a comfort to have that perspective in your own life in the last 10 years of motherhood. Can you talk to us about the role that diving deep into astrology and really owning this has brought you?
Yeah, sure. Well, you and I know the shopping centre car park story. I feel like I need to just do a short recap of the shopping centre car park story.
Please.
because this is kind of what brought me here, I suppose. Like, I was in in 2019, I'd just realized that my marriage was over, and I didn't, surprisingly now with hindsight, see it coming. And I was in the shopping center car park talking to one of my friends, and she referred me to an astrologer. And I'd always been interested in astrology before. But it was just one of those moments where she was like, I think you need some clarity. Go to speak to my astrologist. She always helps me. And so I did. So I ended up on this grainy Skype call with this great shamanic astrologer. And she basically showed me my life in this chart, in this little wheel. I was like, how can you see all of these things about me from this little wheel with lines and stuff in it? And I was fascinated. And there were all these parts of myself that she could see that I really deeply wanted to be true. I was like, that is, yes, that's who I am. That's what I want to be, but I wasn't being those things. So it was like this affirmation of you can be those things if that's what you want. And so then I had to find out about astrology. I had to go down that path. And as you know, that completely changed everything, because I needed to have that deeper level of self-awareness, and that's what astrology has given me. It's a rabbit hole, a never-ending rabbit hole of unpacking, I guess, layers of conditioning, layers of stories, layers of all of the things that I have done that were not in alignment with what I really wanted to be doing. And also seeing it all, it's a language. So just being able to interpret that language and understand how these things are actually playing out, giving myself perspective on how my life is playing out, and giving myself that understanding of the people in my life as well, so that I can get more perspective, get more compassion on them as well, has been so powerful. And that understanding of like life cycles, like you say, is just so helpful, because these things we feel like we're going through, especially when we get into our 40s, it's like this time of kind of massive, it feels like massive upheaval. It feels like all of these things are coming up, and it's really hard to kind of keep on top of, all these changes that are happening. And I find that in a way, astrology is really comforting, because it's like, this is a cycle that's going to come up for you at this time of your life, and it's going to move on, and this is going to feel heavy in this way for this time period, and then it's going to move on and something else will come up. But it's like you can just start to relax into the flow of life instead of always being like, oh, what's going to happen? It's more of a surrender, surprisingly.
I totally
into the
agree.
flow. Yeah. And I think this time around with my third child, I also looked at that cycle and I went, oh, it's a time of, it's an inward time. Like it, I happened to have a baby in a fourth house year, which is, the fourth house is the house of home. It's the house of private time. It's kind of like it's like being in a little bit of a sanctuary, being quite secluded. And I was like, well, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
I didn't leave my house for a year pretty much. And also some other things are happening in my chart, which made total sense for that very much retreat. And being in business, it's like sometimes really hard to accept those times of retreat, because you feel like you need to constantly be out doing, pushing things forward. Otherwise you get left behind. I think that could be the same in the corporate world as well. But when you have that understanding of those cycles, you can be like, okay, well, this is what I need to do now. So if I retreat, I can come out bigger later. Next year I can do these things. This year I can't. Yeah. I just can't commit to that stuff. And you can kind of let it all go without the feeling of, and just needing to do all of the things.
It brings to mind how, on the 1st of January, we all sit down around the world and say, right, what are my intentions for the year and what are my goals? And we'll say things like, this year I'm going to write a book or change jobs or meet my soul partner or have another baby or whatever it is that we're wanting to put out into the world. And we do it so blindly, not understanding at all ourselves, the dynamics around us. And so often being a very goal-driven, hard on myself person, as you know, Soph, because you know my chart so well. We're only a day apart. We're both, the driven Capricorns. I have, up until I really worked with you and understood this, like I would never do that anymore. I would never just blindly say, this is what I'm going to do over the next 12 months or these are my goals without giving myself some grace and understanding that things will change, but also understanding that there's bigger elements at play here.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think we do that. We do that so well, especially in business. We're like, let's just dive in and do all of the things. And this is why sometimes having an astrology reading can be really frustrating. I know when I first started having astrology readings, I was like, what do you mean I can't do this thing? What do you mean I'm not going to make lots of money this year? Like, that's what I want. Capricorn brain. I'm like, but that's my plan. I'm planning on making lots of money this year. And sure enough, the year would unfold and it would be like, no, now is the time for doing this. Now is the time to pivot. Now is the time, like it kind of, you try and butt up against it, but you kind of get pulled back into the energy. It just is what it is.
Yes. And I think as we go along trying to be all and do all, whether in our relationships, in our home, in family, and in work, whatever that looks like, the further along I get, the more I realize that I don't know, it doesn't serve us. We have to understand that there are seasons of retreat, like you said.
Yes.
There are seasons of quiet. There's seasons of energy within the month, the year, the cycle that we're in, that we have to have this understanding of ourselves. And that's the real returning to the feminine way of looking at things rather than this masculine. Every day is the same. Our energy is always the same. It really is this return to the feminine, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So when you have had to then navigate motherhood again now, going into it, like we said, with this understanding of yourself, I wonder if you could also share with us what it's been like and share as much as you're comfortable with going into this, having experienced motherhood and parenthood before, but with a partner who hasn't. I would love to hear that because I know that for many of our listeners, that is their experience. I've interviewed a number of women on the podcast over the years who were stepmothers first and so had that experience of mothering in that role but hadn't birthed a baby themselves and the challenges within that. So I'd love to hear your experience of going into motherhood again and allowing your beautiful new husband to experience this in his own way for the first time when you already know so much. How do you do that?
It's a challenge. It's a challenge some days. But I think I'm very, very blessed, very lucky because he has from the beginning been like, I know you know what you're doing and I trust you and I'm learning from you. Or I'm learning with you in some ways. And I think it was really great because he learned about fatherhood as well by being a stepfather. So, or by fathering my young children, because my kids, when he came into our lives, my daughter was 5.
Yes.
My son was nearly 8. So they were still quite young and he wanted to be involved in everything. Like he wanted to be in all the school events. He wants to be at all the school pickups. He wants to be, doing all of the things. From the beginning, he always wanted to be involved because it was kind of like his life dream to be a dad. Like he was just waiting for the right time, which I think is so beautiful. But he was always super involved in everything with them. And then when we found out I was pregnant, he was so excited and wanted to be involved in everything from that point. I wanted to know all of the things. And you know Carlos. He's very he likes to ask all the questions and wants to know all the things and wants to take everything a step further, and like that's awesome. So he was at every single doctor's appointment. He never missed a scan. He never missed anything, and just completely excited and involved from the get-go. And that was definitely different to my first experience of motherhood. And I think that's, that's just who he is. Like because as I said, it's really important to him. Fatherhood is really important to him. And it's also part of his personality. It's part of his upbringing. It's part of his culture. That family is the center of everything. And so that's why I think this experience was so completely different to my first experience of motherhood. But, now that the baby is like a toddler, we've had to go through like the whole, like his first, Carlos as a dad, his first experience of a newborn and his first experience of the baby growing up, and this understanding of, that's how that works. That's how breastfeeding works. Or that's how that's how sleep works. How do they get in that? Like, how do we do the car seat? And, it's like seeing it all again for the first time.
Wow.
Kind of like, I get a new perspective on the whole thing. And he has such reverence for the process. He had such reverence for the pregnancy process and the birth process, and this whole that whole fourth trimester, I suppose, of being at home with the baby. Like, he took a lot of leave to be at home with the baby and me, and make sure that I was really well looked after, and that the baby had everything, and that the kids had everything, and that they felt really involved as well in that they weren't feeling like they weren't involved with the baby, and that they weren't getting to do what they wanted to do, and all that sort of thing as well. Like, it's just been, different.
It's really interesting to experience different cultures and cultural ways of family and honoring the mother, and how they are centered in the family, and how they are revered and celebrated and supported, especially like when you look at South American culture and Latino culture. Like, there is such a difference, isn't there? There really is a reverence for the role of mother that is different than we would have in, some parts of the world.
Yeah, it is. It does feel very different. And this sort of reverence for the feminine that I hadn't experienced before, that I really, really appreciate, is really beautiful to have that experience.
So when you look at where you are now then, and what and the understanding that you brought to yourself, both from the second time around of becoming a mother, third, obviously this is your third child, but the re-entry into this with the first and the second, what do you think has been the greatest insight that you would love to share with everybody? What do you think that you've gone into it this time that has made the biggest impact on you yourself, and this accepting of this new identity, because you're still processing how you're going to work and you're still navigating it all? Like, what is the anchor in this?
Yeah, I think the anchor is me. I think that I feel so much more grounded than I did then. I feel so much more stable. It doesn't mean that I always respond in the best way, or that I definitely don't. But I feel solid. I feel like then I was kind of very easily swayed. Like, I feel like probably more like bamboo, like that whole idea of like become like the bamboo, that you are very hard to break, but you can move with the wind. Like
Yes.
you're flexible, but you're solid. You're strong in your core, in your roots. And I guess that's how I feel now. And that's the big difference to how I felt the first time. And I think obviously the support of my partner now is a contributor to that feeling of groundedness or rootedness in myself. And also I have a deeper respect for myself that I didn't have then, because I didn't understand my body. I didn't understand motherhood. I didn't understand myself as a mother, and I didn't accept her. Whereas now I have a deeper respect and reverence for myself too, after having this, going through this experience again. I think that's what helps to give me that feeling of I can do this, and no matter the weather, I can weather the storm, kind of thing.
Wow, I love that so much. I've got that image in my mind. And I think just finally, having something that you can return to understand yourself is what else I've really heard from this conversation. For you, it's your chart. It's the understanding of what's happening. It is your understanding of astrology. And I think for many of us, the difference between being blown by the wind and completely crumbled to being able to move with the weather is what do we return to understanding about ourselves in that moment? Like, how do we come back? What are our tools and what are our anchors? How do we ground ourselves? And that's what it's been for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all of us we're always going to get the wobbles. Like, it's going to happen. There's going to be life circumstances, curveballs, all sorts of stuff thrown our way. But if we do have that deeper understanding of who we are, what we're here to do, where our friction points are, I think that's been huge for me, is understanding those friction points and knowing, okay, I know I'm being activated by this now. Like, it's that level of self-awareness where you can go, okay, I know what's happening, and being able to consciously correct. And, that whole idea of when you make the unconscious conscious, you can then work with it. Like, I think that's the huge power of astrology, that, that when we can really get that conscious awareness of why we do the things we do, then we can change them or improve them or even just accept them.
Yeah, that's it. Oh, I totally agree. Thank you so much, beautiful. I'm going to share in the show notes how people can find out more about what you do. And if you're in business and you want to understand both yourself and the season you're in and how you can do this differently, please reach out to Soph. She has changed my life in so many ways. Those car park conversations we've had over the last, 6 years have been the anchor for myself for so many moments. So thank you so much, beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, as always, for being a part of our global Matrescence community. Please take a moment and make sure you're subscribed to this podcast in your podcast player so you can always be notified of our next episode. And if you would like to work with a coach on your own experience of Matrescence, please go to mummarising.net and explore our directory of phenomenal coaches, workshop leaders, space holders and facilitators around the globe. You can also explore our Global Matrescence Foundation and consider donating so a mama in need can access the support of one of our coaches and still ensure that our coaches receive the income and support they need so they can continue to work in this way. And finally, if you would like to be a coach, a facilitator, and a matrescence activist in your own community, jump on our waitlist for our next intake of the Mama Rising Facilitator Training at mamarising.net. Thank you for being here and being part of this movement. Until next week, bye.